Welcome back to Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
And look at us in the same room.
Yes, for once.
For once, for a very short period of time. Hey, we wanted to just welcome you back in and certainly express our gratitude for those of you that have been listening, those of you that have been commenting on the YouTube channel. We love it. Keep it coming. You're always welcome to contact us through the website, curiositynotjudgment.com, or of course, anywhere you hear or watch this podcast, you're welcome to leave comments. It always is joyful to me to be able to read what you guys are responding and thinking about. So it's cool stuff.
Cool stuff.
So wanted to talk today, maybe a heavy topic, but we won't make it too burdensome. But I think this is something that we struggle with as people, that there are behaviors from our past, or maybe even behaviors from our present, that are really in conflict with who we want to be. And what happens when you have an element of yourself that you really despise? Whether that's a past behavior or a current one.
That's interesting. And parts of ourselves that we despise. And that's an interesting thing because it is absolutely part of the human condition. But how can a thing despise itself, right? How, and where's the integrity in that? And so now rationalization of things that I just do anyway because I have a really good rationalization for, but things that I truly despise, what do I do about that? And can I compartmentalize it into just one part of my life?
Well, so compartmentalization, easy for me to say, has its purposes and has its values, I'm sure, with certain behaviors that you really need not to touch other behaviors, right? And we think about maybe even a lab experiment. You have a disease, you have a contagion, you have something, and you need it to be contained. It has to be in a compartment by itself. It can't touch the other things. But when you start working on the human psyche, when you've got a behavior, a destructive behavior in and of yourself, and you're trying to self-contain, I don't know how successful we truly are, because inevitably those behaviors are gonna brush up against other behaviors and other situations in your life, I would think.
Yeah, and as someone who suppressed feelings and didn't even identify feelings or understand what feelings were for the majority of my life, until recently, that there's a red flag that goes up when you say try to cage or contain or make something go away in part of your life. I feel like I have finally learned, and it's been way too late. Well, I should say we're all on our own journey, right?
Sure.
But I think that containing something or trying to make it go away is a very hard thing for us as humans to do. So, you know, it's better to replace the behavior. It's better to think differently, change our paradigm, convince ourselves that it's better not to do it or to do something different. I think that seems to be a better way to go. But I understand what you're saying about containment. I know that I act very differently in different situations. So there's a different Gary in one situation than there is in another.
Sure.
I think about some of the things I have the hardest times with, like driving. I get continuously frustrated with people who are driving and aren't, you know, following the rules so that we can all get somewhere faster. It's like, but it's a control issue. It's a bunch of things. However, if you find me with a group of strangers in a totally different situation, I'm the most kind, loving, generous person around, right? And so why is that, right? So we absolutely as human beings do have containers, if you want to call it that, or compartments, where we act differently in different environments and different situations. And I suppose in our own psyche, we've got these little rooms. There's a theory about compartmentalization. In the old days in shipping, when they started trying to, you know, have ships cross the oceans, what you didn't want to have happen is if you got a hole in the hull, it sinks the whole ship.
Sure.
So they would do a double hull. And in that double hull would be compartments, so that if you got a hole in the outer hull, it would be contained to just that part of the inner hull, and you can imagine how that would work. And people would say, well, can I do that in my life? Can I do wrong? Can I do something that I really, by my own values, doesn't even fit in one compartment of my life and have it not affect the others?
I have a theory, but go ahead.
I'm posing the question. I'm not having an answer right now. I think it's I think you could argue both ways.
Gosh, I don't know. I think for a time you could keep that ruse up, and I do think it's a ruse.
It's a ruse, okay.
My gut on this one is, yeah, you might be able to compartmentalize. Hey, I spit it out. There you go. A behavior that's a negative behavior when you're in a work setting, but then is it really dealt with? Or when you get home, do you blow up at everybody, you know, in your path? I don't think it, maybe it's delayed rather than compartmentalized, because I just don't think it stays in its little containment field only to be, you know, only to reemerge when you open the door. I think it probably builds pressure behind its containment, and it's going to come out and expose itself, maybe in very uncomfortable ways, because there's only so long that thing can contain the pressure.
Well, and I've got this visualization from a quote I heard years ago that said that, you know, unexpressed feelings never die, they just come forth later in uglier ways when you bury them. Like I've got this picture of a zombie rising out of a grave. Sure. And so I think that it could be with behaviors also, and I think you're right. And I think there's a lot of people, and I think you bring up a good scenario of work versus home. We sometimes say, well, I'm a totally different person at work. Are you? Or are you the same person in a different environment, responding and reacting in different ways? I think the latter is true. So if you can compartmentalize work and family, and then community or church, or try to compartmentalize, you know, does that work? I think one of the principles that parents would tell children, you know, when a parent says, hey, you should never cuss. Well, who cares if it's only around my friends? Well, then it'll come out at another time when you're in a work situation or you're in a classroom situation where there will be consequences. So it probably isn't good to get used to doing it in one part of your life and have it affect another. So I think there's some theories. And the guy who was telling the story about the ship did say his hypothesis was that it's impossible to do one thing in one part of your life and not have it affect the others.
I'm going to pose this from a different angle, I suppose. If there's been a past behavior that has drastically and negatively impacted your life, what happens when you just try to bury that incident, never really dealing with the root cause, just hating it, hating that that's part of your background, hating that that's part of your history, but just moving on and trying to bypass that season? Yeah,
so, and that's totally different than current.
Yes.
Let's make it clear. If it's something that's currently going on, I think it's probably best dealt with, and we probably should not be fooling ourselves with a ruse, like you're saying, that we can deal with it and we can just keep it in one part of our lives. It's probably going to spill over. The thing in the past is a total different situation. And the thing in the past, when you've had trauma, when you've had an addiction, a thing that's happened in your past, a series of bad behaviors or one really bad behavior, you know, burying it, pretending it didn't happen, it may not be the best course. It wouldn't be the recommended course. Dealing with it though, and realizing that, hey, this was bad, and my intention is to never do this again, and or to move on from that, I think requires grace for yourself, and I think should be almost expected of the people around you. Expected. People may not live up to your expectations, but I think you can expect a modicum of grace of people who know you and who are for you. Your enemy may dig it up tomorrow if you try to run for office.
Sure. And
you just have to deal with it. But I think people can sense if you've changed. People can sense if you're the way you used to be when you performed that way in the past. I think things in the past, we must move on.
Yeah.
And so if something in the past is dragging you down and making you act differently and not be your best self, that needs to be dealt with.
Absolutely. And I think that's really where the curious questions have to begin, And so let's say there's an incident. Maybe you've got a DUI in your past that you're kicking yourself over. You've got, a huge heated argument that broke relationship, and you continue to ruminate on it, and it was a past event, and yet it's still impacting your present. So that is a situation not dealt with. So I think you begin to ask those curious questions, probably whittling down to the root cause question, right? Why did things go so off track? Why did things go so far? How did this get so explosive? And to begin to do some of that self-analysis. But assuming that you've walked through the process of, restitution, whatever that looks like, whether it's forgiving yourself, forgiving someone else, asking someone else's forgiveness, if you've gone through that process and yet it's still kind of just an area of shame, then that's a different set of questions, right? It's just kind of like this yucky thing that's kind of hanging out back there.
I am convinced that every human being has a journey that is worth a really good story and worth being able to tell and lead to and be instructful for others as a path to redemption. Believing that, and one could argue whether that's a valid belief or not, but believing that, I think that there's always room for acknowledging the past, but not regretting it or wishing to shut the door on it, but using it to be beneficial to others. And others are going to be in a similar situation to you, and you can, if nothing else, be a guide and a light to people who are also in that situation. I think if our motivation is to be helpful to our fellow man, it's hard to go wrong if that's your motivation, right? And so if your agenda is others, if your motivation is for to be a benefit to others in any given situation, then the past can be actually very useful.
Yes.
No matter how bad it is.
Yeah. So should we all come out airing our dirty laundry in hopes that our story and our mistakes are going to be a trail guide for someone else?
Well, I'm going to listen to someone who has been vulnerable and tells me about a hard time in their life versus somebody who's perfect.
Yeah, I suppose that's true as well.
But on the other hand, you don't lead with, your worst sin,
right?
Your worst thing that you've ever done in your life. That's out of context, right? I think in the right context, it could be very useful, especially if someone comes to you and is just weeping and saying, I can't go on because I've done this. Well, guess what? If you've had a similar experience, you could be very useful to that person at that time and show them that there is life on the other side of this, and here's been my experience, and here's how I dealt with it, right, wrong, or indifferent. I can share with you what I've done.
Yeah. I'm curious your thoughts about those that have built a platform around a past, crisis or event. And I can think of a few public speeches that I've heard where the upfront explanation is, I was drunk, I got behind the wheel of a car, and I killed a 10-year-old. And this is my life moving forward.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that as a lead-in to a professional speaking engagement?
Oh, wow. That's a whole nother thing. Again, what's the motivation? Is that speaker truly trying to help others on a path of redemption who've been in similar situations, or to prevent others from getting in that situation in the first place? If that's their true motivation, I'm going to give that person grace. If it seems to me that the motivation is just to, make a buck or have a story or have a 15 seconds of fame, then not so much. But then again, who am I to judge? I think that's, again, everybody's on their own path, and everybody's, I believe, doing the best they can given their current set of situations and environment. And so, if you believe that, then, you just have to look at that and say, am I getting something out of this story? Is it meaningful to me? Is it so much like me that it's putting a mirror up and it's pointing out parts of my life that I don't like, and so I project those feelings onto the person, right? So I think that's we all have to do our own thinking on that. But I think that, again, back to the motivation, if you're trying to help others in a redemptive process, help others get through things and be useful again, or help others to prevent going through that in the first place, I think that's fine. Now, there's other things like cancer and other things that you can't prevent people from going through.
No, certainly.
And so, as a cancer survivor myself, it happens frequently, probably once a month, once every other month, that someone says, "Hey, Gary, I know you went through this. I've got a friend who's just been diagnosed. Would you please talk to them?" And of course I'll do that.
Yeah.
And am I going to be useful or not? Who knows? But, the one thing I've learned to do is not to come in and give advice.
Yeah.
Here's exactly what you should do.
Right.
And here's your treatment options. And here's how you should deal with this emotionally. That's not going to work.
No.
Here's my experience. Here's what I went through. Here's what I did. And here's what I learned. And from my limited experience from going through this at age 46. If part of that's helpful for you, great. And I'll answer any questions you have.
Yeah. So I heard a few key questions kind of in this topic. The first one really being, have I dealt with this? Have I dealt with this situation from my past? Have I forgiven myself or another person, or have I asked forgiveness for this thing that's been hanging out back there? And then as it becomes time, or if it becomes time to share it publicly, what is my motivation behind sharing this? Are those some good questions?
Those are great questions. Yeah, I was just babbling on. You got good questions out of that. That's good.
I'm good at extrapolating things.
That's good. No, I think that's key. And then you were talking about the past, and I think that goes for the one that's dealing in the present too. Have I dealt with this properly? Have I forgiven myself? If I'm on a path to change, sometimes we get in a vicious cycle where we get into self-loathing because we can't seem to stop, or we keep repeating a bad behavior. And that very thing of beating ourselves up causes us to do the behavior again.
Yep.
That's not a good place to be.
No, it's not.
And so dealing with it again, back to that, is a good thing. And have I forgiven myself? And can I move on? And what's my motivation?
Yeah.
I think are good questions for the present one too.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, what are your thoughts? Do you have additional curious questions that you might add to the mix? By all means, we welcome your feedback. So we will pick up next time and welcome you to review and comment on any of the past episodes. We always love to hear your feedback, as I said at the beginning. So curiositynotjudgment.com, and you can find all of the available platforms that we're carrying on. So thanks again for your time and attention.
Take care.